Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 104.
Welcome to meeting 114 of the Ethics Committee. Pursuant to Section 1083, the committee is studying the impact of misinformation and misinformation on the work of parliamentarians. Before we begin, I would like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures.
And potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries. All in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from the microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please only use a black-approved earpiece. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. And when you're not using your earpiece, please place it face down in the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. Ces mesures sont en place afin que nous...
These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to a ruling in accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses. I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting.
I want to make sure that you wait until you're recognized before speaking. And a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I don't want to see any cross-table comments. And I would also like to welcome our witnesses today. Our witnesses are here for the first hour. First, we have from the Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, Jakub Kalensky, Deputy Director, COI Hybrid Influence. Welcome, sir. From the Media Ecosystem Observatory, Angus Bridgman, who is an assistant professor. And as an individual, we have Mr. Kenny Chiu here, who is a former member of Parliament. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Kalensky, you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. I'd like you to go first. Please start.
Thank you very much, and let me thank you also for inviting me here. It is an honor both for me and for the Center of Excellence. In the limited time, allow me to address only two very brief points. What is the hybrid COE and what are we trying to do to help our participating states to counter the threat of disinformation? And secondly, what are the best practices in countering disinformation that we have identified? The Center of Excellence is an international organization for EU member states and NATO allied countries. So Canada is a member as well. And until recently, we had a seconded colleague from the Canadian government here. Currently, we have 35 participating states. So out of the group of EU NATO countries, we are missing only last one. Our mission is to strengthen the participating states' security by providing expertise and training for countering hybrid threats. In order to achieve these goals, we have different products, you could say. We publish reports, we organize events like conferences, seminars, workshops, and we run tailored products like trainings and exercises. We have these products also in the file of disinformation, which is my responsibility. Just recently, we published a report on the role of humor in countering disinformation. We published a report on the Ukrainian countermeasures against Russian disinformation, because Ukraine is the country that has the most experience with Russian disinformation. we published a report on the impact success of disinformation campaigns, because we saw that this is a topic that our participating states frequently struggle with. How can we estimate what is the impact, what is the effect of the work that the information aggressors are doing? We also run a workshop for practitioners in countering disinformation. So every year we gather the people from our participating states in Helsinki and have let them exchange best practices, lessons learned, what works, what doesn't work, what are the gaps, what more needs to be done. And we are also designing a brand new disinformation exercise where we would try and bring the knowledge to the capitals to do some capacity building there, train 30, 40, 50 people in a country on countering disinformation. If I move to the second topic, what are the best practices we have identified? Maybe let me kick off with an observation that I believe that it is necessary to implement many countermeasures simultaneously. Some people seem to think that one countermeasure will solve the whole problem. Some people think that about media literacy. Some people think that about strategic communication. I even registered people who are working just on mocking disinformers, that this is the only tool we need and nothing else is necessary. I don't believe it's true. I think we need to apply more countermeasures because each of them will solve only a part of the problem. If we want to solve the whole problem, we need more countermeasures. The whole of society problems require whole of society solutions. So in the group of countermeasures, I believe we identified four bigger groups. I call it 4 lines of defense. So first, it's about detecting, documenting what is happening in the disinformation space. It sounds primitive, but unfortunately, we still don't have a full idea, especially about the quantitative aspect, like how many disinformation channels are there, how many messages per day they spread, how many people do they persuade. Imagine you would be fighting the COVID pandemic without knowing how many people got the virus, how many people are vaccinated, how many people died. It would be almost impossible. But unfortunately, we are in this situation with disinformation. It's very difficult to design adequate solutions when we don't have this data. The second line is about raising awareness. So whereas in the first line, we are trying to get more data, in the second line, we are trying to spread this information among more audiences. Here, I believe the number of actors is really key because each of them has only a very limited audience. The audiences are nowadays significantly more fragmented than they were 10, 15 years ago. And therefore, we need more actors who will be addressing the fragmented audiences that we have nowadays. The third line is about trying to repair the systemic weaknesses in the information ecosystem. So this is where media literacy comes in. This is where strategic communication comes in order to prevent the distrust of the population towards their institutions, which is a weakness that the disinformers are very often exploiting. But this is also where the pressure on social media companies come, because social media environment is unfortunately still a weakness that gets exploited by the information aggressors.
Okay, thank you.
And finally,
sorry, Mr. Kalinsky, we're over time.
Okay, sorry about that.
If you want to pick up any of those points, you can do that during Q&A. But I'm going to go to Mr. Bridgman now. Mr. Bridgman, you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Go ahead, please. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. My name is Angus Bridgman. I'm an assistant professor at McGill University, where I direct the Media Ecosystem Observatory. We're sort of Canada's leading research entity dedicated to understanding and addressing online harms. We also anchor the Canadian Digital Media Research Network. I want to focus kind of my comments on two thoughts today. The first is around this idea that mis and disinformation are an existential threat, and that they are the existential threat facing democracies today. And there's been some sort of recent international polling that has suggested that people are very profoundly concerned about this, and as parliamentarians, and of course the study in question, this is a real concern. And research over the last 5 years that my team and colleagues have done has really shown that mis and disinformation are part of the Canadian information ecosystem. They are part of it. They are there. And I'm really looking forward to hearing comments from the third speaker today about some of the impacts of it. But that this is not something that is changing the outcomes of elections. It is not something that is dramatically altering Canadians' attitudes and behaviors. There's a few reasons for that. First, most Canadians, most people are quite inattentive to politics. Individual stories, especially fringe misinformation and disinformation stories, kind of float by unheeded. Those who do hear them tend to be already predisposed to hearing that information, maybe already have attitudes in line with that misinformation. So what you're seeing there is this dynamic where, yes, it is occurring, but the actual systematic impact is relatively low. And we study that looking at sort of large-scale digital trace data coupled with nationally representative survey data. We did studies in the last two federal elections and the last Quebec election, and sort of for all three concluded that the role that misinformation played was relatively minor, although we did document numerous instances of it. And that sort of gets to the second point that I want to highlight, which is that there's this tendency to think of mis and disinformation from a harms perspective, from a securitization perspective. This is something we need to protect against, and there's value for that sort of thinking. But it's not the only way to think about it. And I think it's very important to sort of try to understand instead that mis and disinformation, false information, is a regular, consistent part of the information ecosystem, is a consistent part of politics, and its existence does not mean we need to stamp it out, we need to fight it, the mere fact that it exists does not mean that it is deserving of combating. Instead, we can think of, okay, this is an information ecosystem. This is something that can be studied. This is something that can be made more resilient. We can inform the population. We can do media literacy, of course, but there are other ways that we can sort of prepare a population to say, okay, this is the type of information you're going to encounter while you're using digital media, while you're trying to understand the political world. Here are some of the dynamics, and we can better understand those dynamics and better try to address them sort of collectively as a society. So sort of the first point there is that the mis and dis, it's out there. It's not that it's inconsequential. It does matter, but it is not existential, at least not yet in Canada, to the extent that there is this sort of pervasive feeling that, this is really deeply damaging. It matters. We need to study it. We need to address it. We need to think about it sort of in a holistic way, but we don't need to stamp it out. And the notion that even it could be stamped out or addressed in that way is sort of spurious. Happy to talk kind of about either of those points during the question answer period. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bridgman. Mr. Chu, 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, as we navigate through the labyrinth of disinformation and misinformation, I'm compelled to share personal experiences that underscore the urgency of our task. Whether concocted by state actors, malicious groups, or individuals, its intent is very clear. Manipulation it is. It seeks to sow discord, erode trust, and undermine the foundations of truth. In the crucible of Canada's electoral process, truth and deceptions collided, leaving lasting scars on our democracy. But what is disinformation? What is misinformation? Let me give an example on assault rifles and the campaign literature. Imagine on the quiet streets of Steveston, Richmond East during the last election, concerned and engaged Chinese residents would approach me and my dedicated volunteers. They would brandish a mail-in drop card, an innocuous piece of paper in their native Chinese language, advancing a dangerous falsehood. It asserted the Conservative government would revoke prohibition on assault rifles. This was chilling prospect, especially for many community members who hail from a culture with strict firearm prohibitions. But here's the twist. It was untrue. The Conservative had no such intention, yet misinformation, akin to stealthy intruder, permeated our community, sowing seeds of fear and mistrust. And let me tell you another cynical story. This time it's about disinformation. Like an architect crafting an elaborate facade, complete with fictional walls, doors, and windows, disinformation constructs an entire structure from scratch, intentionally to deceive its audience. Now, let me introduce my former opponent. In my view, his ascent to power was paved with disinformation, perhaps through a calculated strategy or at the very least, as a willing participant in a now proven disinformation campaign. He willingly embraced and propagated accusation targeting conservatives, including our then leader Aaron O'Toole and myself, of racism and harboring anti-Asian sentiments, exploitative and manipulative. These allegations linked to foreign states reverberated through biased media channels and chat groups. If holding the Indian government accountable for alleged actions in Canada, it's not anti-Asian, anti-Indian, then why would countering the confirmed clandestine and deceptive efforts of Chinese communists in Canada ever be considered anti-Chinese? But there's more. He publicly pledged to the Chinese audience that he would not support a foreign influence registry. This promise directly contradicted the Minister of Public Safety's announcement in 2022 and 2023. As we gather here, I'm reminded of diabolical propaganda techniques employed by authoritarian regimes throughout history that involve repeating colossal falsehoods until they became accepted truth. Ordinary citizens bombarded with these orchestrated lies found their minds ensnared in a web of deception. Hatred and prejudice flourished as the strategy took root. Today, we face an even more vast digital battlefield where disinformation thrives. Our diaspora cultural communities, often isolated and insular, bear the brunt of these campaigns. Their reliance on ethnic media and foreign apps, while essential for maintaining connections, renders them vulnerable. Whether foreign regimes aim to meddle in our electoral process or domestic actors plot to mislead Canadians, the consequences are dire. To counter this manipulation, we must champion a vibrant and engaged ethnic media community, one that distinguishes facts from allegations, empowers informed debates, and refuses to be silenced. Let us heed the lessons of history, fortify our defenses with media literacy, and stand firm against corrosive forces that seek to manipulate our minds and fracture our unity. Thank you for your attention, and may our commitment to democracy in action guide us towards a future where the light of truth dispels the shadows of misinformation and disinformation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Thank you, everyone, for their opening statements. We're going to start with our first 6-minute rounds, and for that, we'll go to Mr. Cooper. You have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chu, it is well documented that you were the subject of a disinformation campaign directed by the Beijing-based communist regime during the 2021 election, targeting the Chinese diaspora in your riding. Even though this government had information that you were being targeted, that information was not passed on to you, and voters in your riding were kept in the dark. Based on your experience, would you agree that the measures put in place by this Liberal government supposedly to counter foreign interference failed?
Well, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think there has been many commentary on this, and I agree with some of the commentary that says obviously the Liberal government has set this up to catch conservative being benefited by Russians' disinformation, and they are caught surprised by the Communist Chinese campaigning to help the Liberals themselves.
Beijing's disinformation campaign attacked your character and spread outright lies about your position and the position of the Conservative Party on a range of issues. Can you speak about that and what impact this disinformation campaign has had on your reputation in your community?
Thank you again for the question. I think there is a problem with your question, sir, because it presumed disinformation and misinformation, it's only spread during the election time. The matter of fact, it is not true. Even in the public inquiry into foreign interference, basically when the hearing were being conducted, there has been this disinformation. For example, MP Han Dong, when he testified, there had been articles written that says Mr. Han Dong was persecuted in Canada because of his mainland Chinese background. This is completely untrue, and we as Canadians know that, but many in the communities, because of parallel universe they live in, they don't.
Now, for you, Mr. Chair, not only did the mechanisms that the Liberal government set up to counter foreign interference completely failed to counter the disinformation campaign in your riding. But based upon what I'm hearing from your testimony, it's even worse than that insofar as I understand it. The Liberal Party took advantage of Beijing's disinformation narrative, amplified it, and even created complementary misinformation and disinformation products targeting the Chinese diaspora community in Steveston, Richmond East. Is that a fair characterization of what happened? Could you elaborate upon that?
That's my observation in the riding that I ran for re-election in Steveston, Richmond East, and BC. Certainly, that's how I observed and felt. It seemed to me that I always put myself in my opponent's shoes. If I had observed this information being propagated against him, character assassination, I would actually stand to defend him, because it is not true. It is not the right way to conduct our democracy. But unfortunately, that was not the case during the election in 2021. And it was obvious that there were targeted campaign, attack against me, and I was basically alone.
Well, very disturbing to learn that the Liberal Party actively amplified Beijing disinformation. They were not a mere bystander to it. It's worse than turning a blind eye, that's for sure. Now, for you, Mr. Chair, it came to light at the public inquiry on foreign interference that during the 2019 election, the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO, detected disinformation about Justin Trudeau in an article circulating on Facebook. The Prime Minister's Department asked Facebook to remove that article because they said it risked threatening the integrity of the election. By contrast, when the Prime Minister's Department was asked about the disinformation targeting you and the Conservative Party that was circulating on WeChat during the 2021 election, and why they didn't ask for that disinformation to be taken down, a representative from the Prime Minister's Department said dismissively, quote, "The content would likely only reach Chinese diaspora readers," end of quote. What do you make of that explanation, and what does it say about how this government operates?
It touches my very inner identity to its core, because I always believe that the Prime Minister is wrong, that Canada does not have a systemic and structural discrimination against certain group. But what I heard during the hearings shook that a little bit, because it looks like that there are some Canadians that are more worthy and valuable for protection than others. Canada is a multicultural society that we're in, and definitely every Canadian deserves to be protected. And it looks like that the mechanism that they put in place does not handle disinformation and misinformation being spread using non-official languages.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chu and Mr. Cooper. Mr. Housefather for 6, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kolensky, my first question is to you. On October the 7th, Hamas terrorists attacked Israel, creating the biggest massacre of Jews since the Second World War and the Holocaust. Since then, there's been a great increase in anti-Semitism all across the world, including here in North America, where today college campuses are being occupied by people spreading anti-Semitic messaging. How has Russia been involved in fomenting that happening?
Thank you very much. Russia is always happy about any single opportunity where they can increase the polarization of the audiences. And obviously this conflict is one of the most polarizing topics. So they will be using it to do their work. The aim with which they are doing it is probably to spread more of the anti-Western, anti-American sentiment, the US still being the chief target of their disinformation campaigns, and probably with the logic that Israel is perceived as the biggest ally of the US. So I think the motivation is this primitive. In order to denigrate the US, they will be spreading a lot of anti-Israeli sentiments.
Are they joining with Iran in doing that? How is Iran involved in terms of Iran's sponsorship of terrorist organizations, Hamas and Hezbollah, and how are they working with Russia to spread disinformation on social media?
I have to admit, I do not have a good information on how they cooperate. So there have been some reports about Russia cooperating with China in the information space. I'm not aware of reports about the cooperation with Iran. However, I would not be surprised if it was happening. Russia is happy for any help they can get.
And when people can create divisions in North American societies, for example, by amplifying, as Russia does on social media, tropes such as that Jews control the world, or that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to their own countries, how does that help ferment dissension and division in North America, creating an opportunity for Russia to divert the world's attention from the war that it's launched against Ukraine?
This will be definitely part of the reason why they're doing that. If more people focus on what's happening in the Middle East, less people will be focusing on what's happening in Ukraine. The way how they will try to increase the polarization will be to spread very extreme messaging. But sometimes they are doing it for both sides of the barricade. We saw the Russians organizing both pro-Muslim and anti-Muslim rally in the United States. We saw them spreading both radically feminist messaging and very anti-feminist messaging. We saw them spreading both aggressively pro-migration content and anti-migration content. The point is to portray the other side of barricade as unreasonable and something that you cannot agree with. So if you exaggerate the demands or the statements of the other side, then you decrease the possibility of reasonable discussion.
You've seen evidence of Russia amplifying and increasing its social media reach following the October 7th attack on Israel.
I'm not aware of any inauthentic campaigns in this regard, but it might just not be. I haven't paid enough attention.
So what I understood is that in the 7 weeks, so there's an article that you're quoted in Politico in Europe that an organization called the Alliance for Securing Democracy had compiled stats that Russian Facebook accounts posted 44,000 times in the 7 weeks after the conflict began, compared to 14,000 weeks in the 7 weeks before the conflict began, thus a tripling of their social media posts. And that this activity on Facebook was shared almost 400,000 times collectively, a fourfold increase compared to posts published before the conflict. So I've seen in a number of different studies on social media, and I think we'll have a witness, Mr. Chair, on Thursday, who will be talking to this, about how Russia is trying to ferment strife in North America, in Canada and the United States, turning us against each other to divert action or attention away from their own misdeeds in Ukraine. So I think I'm almost finished, so I'll just leave it with you if you have any last comments, Mr. Kolensky.
No, I agree with you. They will be doing that, but sometimes they are just following the news cycle. So when we had the COVID pandemic, they were focusing on COVID. Now, because media focus so much on what's happening in the Middle East, they use this, but it might be something different in a few weeks again.
Okay, you still have a minute, Mr. Housefather.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I didn't realize I had another minute.
I don't.
Wow. Okay. So let me turn my attention, because Mr. Brigsman hasn't gotten any questions yet. Mr. Brigsman, do you have anything to say about what my questions on Russia and what Russia is doing to ferment disinformation in North America?
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Just sort of very quickly, this is absolutely a phenomenon. Russia, Iran, other entities do try to manipulate the information ecosystem in a country like Canada, and that is a phenomenon. We need to understand it, and we need to better study it. And some of the work I do is really about trying to sort of link entities from foreign countries and their penetration into the Canadian information ecosystem. And I can certainly talk about that more. But one of the things that is really key here that I really want to stress when we're talking about mis and disinformation, especially as it relates to sort of the work of parliamentarians, is a lot of this is domestic. It's not just the international that is driving polarization, that is driving toxicity, that is driving these things in our debate. They attempt to exacerbate. But as Mr. Kalinsky was saying, they use opportunities afforded by our political environment, events, moments when there's tension in Canada or in the United States or in other countries where there is political tension, and they try to amplify that. And so there needs to be sort of a concerted effort collectively to say, oh, okay, here's a moment when they're trying to polarize us. We need to take a step back and we're polarized on this issue. There's a problem here. We are going to have a heated debate.
That Mr. Bridgman,
but it's not just because of them.
Yeah, sorry, sir, but that 1 minute grace turned into 1 minute overage. So, Madame Goudreau, bienvenue au comité. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Excellent, merci.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the witnesses, and I want to thank you. This is a very important study for our democracy. My comments will be really to gain a better understanding. From the start, we understand misinformation and disinformation both have impacts. We've had a picture of the situation, but really, where does this all originate? What are the causes for this? And I'd like to ask our two witnesses to answer those questions.
I'm going to start with Mr. Bridgman. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, perfect. So, oui, j'ai compris.
Yes.
Where does it come from? Okay, so in regular political discourse, there is.
Tu peux me parler en français?
You can speak to me in French. But for the benefit of everyone, I'll answer in English.
So,
Mais ma question,
but my question I'm asking it in French, and I would like an answer in French if possible, please.
Goudreau, si Monsieur.
Madame Goudreau, if Mr. Bridgman is not in a position to answer in French, then he can answer in English, correct?
Answer, I've stopped the clock. J'ai arrêté le temps. Mais Mr. Bridgman, I'd like you to answer in whatever language you feel comfortable in, sir. So go ahead.
Mais comme une marque de respect, je vais essayer de...
As a mark of respect, I'll try to answer in French. So yes, what are the sources of misinformation and disinformation in the context of politics? There's always a debate on facts. Always. The categories of misinformation and disinformation are not simply black and white. Sometimes it's quite clear, yes. Sometimes, as Mr. Chu described, it's very clear there is disinformation. But in most cases, with facts, there are debates, real debates, and it is the role of politicians, among others, to navigate through this, to listen, to speak to one another, to try to come to some truth, or to have a divergence of opinion, and then that's that. That's politics. There's always an ambient, as we say in English, a level of misinformation and disinformation within systems. It exists. Sorry, I'll stop you on this. I don't have much time. I'd like to get back to the results of your poll. You said that the results of the election don't change, that the threats have always existed, but it's not existential. What's the result of all of this? What's the upshot? I'm not clear when we look at the reports. I have a question. Do you know of this report, the Commonwealth Association's report, that mentions the significant impact on democracy that this is having? I'd like to hear what you have to say about this poll and my other questions. We did a poll in 2021, a representative population or a segment of population, specifically Chinese Canadians, and what was the change in Canadians' opinions over the election? Had there been a very successful disinformation campaign that really changed the views, we would have seen that in the polls. There's not a major change. It doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact in one riding or an impact in some way. We've heard facts. We know that this has happened, but at the same time, it's not as though at the national population level there's been a change or we've seen one. It's important to say it exists, but the effects are more pernicious over the long term. What do you mean by long term? That's important. In this sense, the studies are showing at some point one of the major consequences of misinformation is actually that it reduces the confidence in politics, which is one of the most significant effects. And what we see in the last 5 years among Canadians, there's been a change in the confidence that we'll have in the media, journalists, and in the in politicians. Even 10 points in the last 10 years, which is partly the role of disinformation and misinformation. I'd like to ask, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask our witness to provide the results of these polls and as well as the impact. There has been a change, and it would be important for the committee to have access to this information. I'd like us to discuss risks, and I've heard Mr. Kalinski's presentation on countermeasures, detection, raising awareness as to the number of actors because there are many, and also addressing the weaknesses. And I'd like to invite Mr. Kalinski to complete those 4 best practices, if you will.
Thank you very much. So before I talk about the 4th line, let me just briefly touch upon the first question you had. And sorry that I don't manage to reply in French. My French is horrible, despite having spent 3 years in Brussels.
Sir, you've got 45 seconds, so you're going to have to go quick, please.
Okay. So what is the cause? For Russia, this is a seemingly non-military measure to achieve military goals. They are very obvious about this. So for them, it's a measure to facilitate military operations. The annexation of Crimea, to which there was close to no reaction, is probably the biggest example of that. But we also see that they succeed in influencing our decision-making following the full-scale invasion in 2022. Russia is very open about the fact that their pseudo-journalists are part of rank and file of the military. They are receiving military awards for their work. Russia is openly telling us that. The 4th line that I did not mention is about limiting, punishing, and deterring of the information aggressors. So whereas in the first 3 lines, we are focusing on ourselves, on building up our defense, in the 4th line, we are actually trying to catch the aggressor here. So the first 3 lines are about building up our immunity and focusing on exercise and eating healthy. The 4th line is about trying to arrest the person who is shooting the people in the head.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Kalinski, aussi, Monsieur Bridgman.
Thank you to our witnesses.
La demande.
Mr. Bridgman, Madame Boudreau's requests for the poll results, can you share that with us? Will you be able to share that with the clerk of the committee up until Friday? That should give you, I think, enough time to do so? Yes, absolutely. We already have a study that's been published with that information, and we can also provide something that's a bit more specific to your question. Thank you very much, Mr. Bridgman.
We're going to go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
And I believe that you are on mute or your microphone is not working. Something's going on here.
I did.
Your microphone is not working.
Hello.
You want to? Yeah, we're not.
And
it's fading in and out, Mr. Green. Unfortunately, can you unplug?
Let me go.
Unplug and plug in again, if you don't mind.
I did just do a sound check. Hold on 1 second. Jabra.
Yeah, you're on. We can hear you. So just,
how is it now?
Is it coming through the microphone? Is your microphone?
I can
plugged in?
hear it.
Okay. Yeah.
Can folks there hear me?
We're going to do a bit of a test. If you can count to 10, Mr. Green, that would be perfect, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Okay.
7, 8, 9, 10.
That's good. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start your time now, Mr. Green. Go ahead for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have to say, I feel like I've been living in a bit of a parallel universe as Mr. Bridgman states that perhaps he doesn't view this to be an existential threat. I wonder, Mr. Bridgman, through your work, was there any study on the phenomenon that happened on the truckers' takeover of our capital, the shutdown of ports and bridges and the civil unrest that was caused coming out of COVID, largely based on conspiracy theories of vaccines, misinformation, disinformation, both domestic and foreign. And I wondered if you could just speak to that. Did your studies take that into account? Because I have to say to you, later on this night, I'm going to be working on a group that is specifically dealing with the Emergency Act, sir. The Emergency Act being one of the most severe measures in our democracy, triggered by what I would say, after almost 2 years of reflection, by the high prevalence of misinformation and disinformation. So can you comment about the work that you're doing, and if you covered that local phenomenon, including many of the foreign actors that were involved in that campaign?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It'd be my pleasure. Yes, I fear that I've given the impression that I don't think that mis and disinformation is potentially existential. Instead, what I'm saying is today in Canada, from what we've observed in terms of impacts of instances of mis and disinformation, it hasn't risen to the level yet of election threat or sort of existential threat to democracy. You raised the trucker protests, and that's a great example of sort of, I think, a mix of two phenomena that are occurring. One of which is this mis and disinformation. And again, I'm happy to provide these to the committee, but have published several academic papers looking at mis and disinformation during COVID-19, and particularly the influence of a lot of the misinformation circulating in the United States and its profound impact on the digital ecosystem up here. So certainly, have observed that. It does matter. It is consequential. But there is also this other dimension of politics. And we can't confuse the two. We can't say just because something there is mis and disinformation behind a political phenomena or part of a political phenomena, that political phenomena wouldn't exist without that mis and disinformation. That wouldn't have occurred absent that, and that the solution to that that political movement is to stamp or reduce or remove or counter just the mis and disinformation part, because that's not necessarily true that we can just say, okay.
And if I could interject for a moment, while I appreciate the distinction between correlation and causation, I think it's safe to say that we wouldn't have ended up in a scenario that would have had to have resulted in invoking for the first time, second time in our history. One was the war measures. This was the Emergency Act in this iteration. A conspiracy that was based on clear misinformation around vaccines, tied to tropes around world control, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization. Indeed, we certainly have political actors, particularly in our Conservative caucus, our friends who continue to espouse these types of conspiracies. But I would put to you, it's my assertion that the underlying pressure on that, had that topic not been perpetrated in that way, then the politicians at the end of the continuum wouldn't have had the material for the kind of ridiculous rhetoric that led in the shutting down of our country and ultimately the extreme measures that were taken vis-a-vis the Emergency Act. So going back to that, if logic says if there's no misinformation, disinformation material to hang their hat on, then malicious political actors on the other side wouldn't have the material to fan the kind of flames that end up in existential threats. And I say that because, while it is true there was a relatively peaceful de-escalation of that moment, it is also true that January 6th led to an insurrection in the United States of America. There are numerous examples around the world where rhetoric and disinformation is used to fuel genocidal rhetoric. We've heard about lots of different state actors here, and we'll get into more in further rounds. But I'm wondering, how do you reconcile that?
So maybe just two little quick things. I absolutely agree that mis and disinformation can exacerbate political anger in a huge way, and can really sort of generate these moments. January 6th, the truckers' protest. They can be strongly linked to sort of that mis and disinformation. Mis and disinformation is consequential, and in fact, one of the things that we sort of repeatedly show in our studies is that even if they don't reach sort of the broader population, you don't need to reach the whole population. You just need to reach a small enough active segment and a small, highly dedicated group of individuals who are have misperceptions or an enormous amount of political anger, partly born because of mis and disinformation, can have a huge political impact. So,
well, let me just
completely agree with
interject
you
for the
there.
last 30 seconds, because when I talk about an existential risk, it is clear that misinformation and disinformation are used to target minority communities. I'll give you an example. White nationalism, neo-Nazism in this country, the vilification of Muslims, of minorities, of trans folks results in the perpetrated violence that occurs. I would share to you the firebombing of Ibrahim Jami Mosque right here, people who are radicalized online by misinformation and disinformation campaigns. I would also put to you that the events that occurred around the truckers' convoy made it feel unsafe for parliamentarians to show up to work. You know, just a week ago, I had a rock thrown through my window. So the political climate that we're in with violence is an existential risk to our democratic institutions. Would you not agree?
Quickly.
The phenomena you've described, absolutely an existential risk. All I can say is that sort of in terms of linking directly to sort of election level outcomes, we've not seen that yet. It doesn't mean that mis and disinformation are not potentially deeply harming or are not deeply damaging to democracy in other ways.
You're going to start our second round for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Chu, the information you've provided this committee certainly shows an astounding double standard that existed between the way that the Prime Minister's office and what is not just the office of the Prime Minister, but the establishment of government and the massive resources that exist in the context of what whether that be directly with security establishment and intelligence apparatus or the communications capacity of a government that is the size of the government of Canada. It shows an incredible double standard that existed between the way that they treated a the threat of disinformation targeting their political fortunes versus the political fortunes of their political opponents. Is that something that you'd agree with? And would you have any further comments on that double standard?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I certainly get that impression myself as well. The Panel of Five and the Site Task Force, these are decision makers that aggregate and assess on aggregated information that is provided to them. So they are very far from where disinformation and misinformation happens locally. Canada has 338 ridings right now. You know, there are many communities and ridings in that are relatively in isolation, perhaps. Stevenson Richmond East, for example, is in the city of Richmond that has more than 55% of ethnic Chinese, and then the rest of 45% are composed of also multiculturalistic communities as well. So there are all ample opportunities for ambitious foreign actors to sway the result and change people's mind.
And if I could, and I'll, for the last 90 seconds or so, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Mr. Brock. But would you be willing to share, you said attacks on your integrity. Could you share with the committee some of those personal attacks, what you experienced, and hopefully if you can keep it in about 45 seconds, then I'll pass it over to my colleague.
Even until recently, when I testify when I was summoned at the commission hearing, there had been still disinformation being spread on CRTC regulated airwaves that says I am a liar, that says there has been zero proof for the Uyghur genocide that I advocated, that my proposed registry for foreign interference, it's entirely designed to persecute Chinese. So these attacks continue. I imagine they're concerned about me running again, and therefore harming their ability to propagate these attacks.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being honest with this committee, because I think that especially with somebody with your background, to face those attacks, I cannot imagine how that made you and your family, the challenges you faced as a result. But I'll pass it over to Mr. Brock.
1.5, Mr. Brock.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chu, your experience is extremely disturbing and alarming to parliamentarians and Canadians. I'm very sorry that you experienced the misinformation and disinformation campaign from the PRC and that your own government failed you miserably. What I'm interested in, though, is more information with respect to the Liberal candidate who won the election. You talked about his amplification of the misinformation and disinformation. Can you give me more examples as to how he did that?
From what I've gathered, it's by attending radio interviews and also community events that he publicly announced that he is not going to support this anti-Asian foreign interference registry. There have been zero clarification as to the Bill C-282 that I proposed. What exactly does it do? There has been no mentioning of any country whatsoever, and the fact that it's to inject transparency into political lobbying activities. These subtleties, these intricacies are not being clarified during those opportunities, and therefore by doing that, by not helping me to clarify my character, he perpetrated and continued the assassination attempts.
Did that continue the entire writ process?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher for 5, and then we've got 2.5, and then we're going to switch over to the second panel. Go ahead, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all our panelists for being here. Mr. Kolensky, I'm very concerned about how disinformation goes from the dark recesses of the Internet to the mainstream. So it starts with a lie, presumably on the Internet, gets amplified by fake accounts, junk media outlets, becomes a hashtag, becomes a little bit more legitimate when ideological news outlets pick it up, and then eventually it lands in mainstream media or in a political party's platforms or speeches. Now, in 2019, when a Syrian family in Halifax died in a very tragic fire, the Prime Minister retweeted my condolence post. And all of a sudden, my social media blew up with racist conspiracy theories and hate about this family and this tragic occurrence. Clearly, bad actors and bots descended on this story, spreading hateful disinformation. And it makes me think about Alex Jones leading a campaign to, in America, to dismiss the slaughter of children at Sandy Hook School. He had claimed that it was staged and that grieving parents were actors. Memorial pages for the young children who were killed were inundated with vitriol towards the parents and mourners. Now, he recently said that he knew that what he was saying wasn't true. However, and this is shocking, in 2022, a poll in The Economist found that almost 20% of Americans believe that the mass shootings like the Sandy Hook massacre had been staged to support gun control. Mr. Kolensky, how does this happen? How does something like this how does a despicable lie from a garbage conspiracy theorist so fully entrench itself in the minds of mainstream citizens?
Thank you very much for the question, and I'm afraid I will have trouble fitting the answer in the limited time frame because this is a very complicated subject. It is I cannot tell you what is the level of coordination between Alex Jones and the very big disinformation players, by which I mean mainly Moscow. However, it seems very much like exactly the kind of work that Russia loves to be done everywhere in the world. Whenever there was a terrorist attack in Europe, be it Brussels, Paris, London, every time you would see the pro-Russian channel spreading exactly the same. It has been staged. It has been staged for the purpose of imposing greater control on the population. What Alex Jones was doing here was basically doing Russia's work. And I don't know whether he was doing it because he was paid for it. I don't know whether he was doing it because he's just a useful idiot abused by the Russian disinformers, but he was certainly doing that. The way these campaigns achieve such a magnificent result is mainly through the sheer numbers, because it's not just social media, it's also the traditional media, the Russian state-controlled ecosystem, the proxy ecosystem, like these Infowars and Breitbarts and Zero Hedges and similar outlets that are very often, they are always saying they are the only independent alternative to the mainstream, but they are usually parroting Russian disinformation. But also the local actors who are helping them to amplify this, be they paid agents, and there is a lot of evidence that Russia is paying hundreds of millions annually to cultivate these people, to spread their disinformation campaigns, politicians, social media influencers, etc. But it might be also just ideological allies, it might be just useful idiots, and in certain cases it might be just cynical individuals who know that they are lying, but it helps them for their political purposes or other goals.
Mr. Chu, you heard the story about the Halifax family, the Syrian family that passed away. You heard me talk about the Alex Jones dismissing the slaughter of children in schools. Would you accept an endorsement from Alex Jones, or would you reject categorically that endorsement?
I'm not fully aware of what he said. And in fact, I don't pay much attention to Alex Jones myself. The only consideration I have is I was imagining what happened if those mis and disinformation are being spread on WeChat in a language that is not one of the official languages, and what kind of discourse we have, what kind of response are we going to have. Parliamentarian will not be even aware of the disinformation, misinformation being spread. And that's why I keep saying on WeChat, on TikTok, on Douyin, these are platforms that are problematic for us. These are controlled by foreign actors, and these are dictatorial regimes that are interested to harm the very peaceful harmony that Canada is in.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Fisher, Madame Goudreau, 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Given the fact that I have 2.5 minutes, I have actually more requests than questions. I'd like to get to Mr. Brigman. You were talking about studies in the U.S. We'd like to have copies of those at the committee, and any further complementary information, whether it has to do with an effect on democratic life or anything of the nature. I am concerned by that. We want to find ways to counter what could be coming down the pike. Now, when you talk about reducing disinformation, for the benefit of the committee, I would like some information on that as well, so we can better do our jobs as legislators. I'll give Mr. Kalinsky some time now. I understand, best practices when it comes to defense, if you will, and then the last part of repairing those gaps. If we don't have much time, I'd also urge our other witness to provide us any further information. I know that when in his opening statement he didn't have much time. I'll leave you the next minute to say what you can.
In case you would be interested in more detail, I will be more than happy to share with you one report on these 4 lines of defense. It's about 20 pages. In this repairing of the systemic weaknesses, I think we have the tools like media literacy. We see that in countries where they have a higher level of media literacy, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, there is a smaller problem with disinformation, not a zero problem, but a smaller one. Definitely strategic communication campaigns, the efforts to try and increase the level of trust of the audience into their institutions. It has to be depoliticized Stratcom. It cannot be a promotion of the current political leadership. But we see that in countries where there is a functioning strategic communication system, again, the trust of the audience is higher. But it's also trying to work on decreasing the polarization, decreasing the differences between the capital and the countryside, the people with higher income and lower income. Again, we see that in countries where there is a lower level of polarization, the problem with disinformation is smaller. So these would be the parts about repairing the weaknesses. But in case you are interested in more detail, I'll be more than happy to share the text.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Let's go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to allow some more space for that so that we get solid recommendations coming out of the study, Mr. Kulinski. So I'll ask you with specificity, what legislative or regulatory measures in Europe or elsewhere have been successful in addressing disinformation campaigns, especially when it affects parliamentarians, whether during election periods or throughout the year?
I'm not really sure you would find legislative measures that are targeted only at disinformation campaigns, targeted elections. I think it would be more broad. I think it would be regardless of the election cycle. We saw the most aggressive measures like outright bans, most of them happening in Ukraine, but also in the EU. There was a ban on Russia Today and Sputnik. Ukraine has gone further. They banned also not owned by the state channels, but channels still spreading the same disinformation that is being spread by the channels owned by Russia, but channels owned by a Ukrainian oligarch, Viktor Medvedchuk. Most of Europe has not done that so far. But these outright bans, they would be probably the most aggressive solution.
On that point, though, let's be clear, regardless of who owns it, particularly the private sector, you look at Meta, you look at X, if that information is for sale anyways, is it your assertion that we ban all platforms? I know in the United States, the Republicans and even I think some Democrats are pushing for the banning of TikTok, and yet you look at Cambridge Analytica in the lead up to January 6th, that insurrection certainly wasn't based on TikTok. So I wonder if you could comment just about whether or not the outright bans of these platforms is more theater than it is an actual application of a sound policy that wouldn't just see it migrate to other commercial interests like Meta or X.
We definitely see the information aggressors adapting to these measures and migrating to different platforms. But there has been some research, although unfortunately just anecdotal, that they always lose at least some of the audience. Not all of it, but at least some of it. And
just quickly before we end up, I want to go back to the parliamentarian thing. Would you care to comment? Do you think that there should be an opportunity for us to look at the way political parties use, like if we're talking about bans, do you think that we might want to look at legislation for partisan political parties to not use these types of tools when it comes to profiling and targeting of people based on algorithms and misinformation?
Very, very quick response.
I'm afraid that with 5 seconds to think, I can't really give you.
Could you submit something for us for the benefit of committee?
I will be happy to try and think about it. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we like to work on timelines here, Mr. Kulinski. So if you can get it to us perhaps by Friday, if that's possible, I would appreciate that on behalf of the committee. We've got a very limited time for our study here, so we've got to make sure that all the information comes in. That concludes our first panel for today. Mr. Kulinski, Mr. Bridgman, Mr. Chu, thank you for taking the time to be here today and share your information with the committee. It was very helpful. We're going to suspend for a few minutes while we change over the panel, so the meeting is suspended. la réunion.
We will resume. I'd like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. So we have, as an individual, Patrick White, Associate Professor of Journalism, Media School, UQAM.
We've got Matthew Johnson, who's the Director of Education, and Catherine Hill, who is the Executive Director. Mr. White, we're going to start with you. Vous avez 5 minutes pour votre déclaration.
You have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Le micro, oui, bonjour.
Good day. Hello, everyone, and thank you to the committee members for this invitation. I've been a journalist since 1990 and a professor at the Université du Québec à Montréal for the last 5 years. I think we're really at a crossroads here in 2024 when it comes to disinformation and misinformation. Automation of content has grown since 2022, since the inception of ChatGPT 3.5 in November 2022. And there's also an MIT study from 2018 that indicates that fake news circulates 6 times faster on Twitter than verified news, so there is cause for concern. The situation on X, formerly Twitter, has worsened over the past 18 months since its acquisition or takeover by Elon Musk, following several controversial announcements, including the possibility of obtaining a blue checkmark, an official status, by paying a few dollars a month, and the restitution or the return of ex-President Trump's account in the United States. It's himself a major vector of misinformation. Social media algorithms push content that makes people react through comments, likes, and shares. It amplifies extreme discourse you've seen over the last few years. One of the concerns today is the blocking of news in Canada by Meta since the summer 2023 on Facebook and Instagram. That are also contributing to the growth of disinformation and misinformation in the country by censoring news from the country's media, except for sports and cultural news. A recent study quoted by Reuters says
Categorized as unreliable sources climbed to 6.9% in Canada in the 90 days after the ban from Meta, compared to 2.2% in the 90 days before. Ça, c'est une étude citée par l'agence Reuters dans les derniers jours.
That was a quote from Reuters over the last few days. And in my opinion, you should try to unblock news on Facebook and Instagram in Canada by the end of 2024, before the federal election in 25 or 26. The implications of this disinformation are political. On Instagram, for example, you have to click on a tab to see political posts. They've been blocked or voluntarily restricted by Meta for several months. And on Facebook, for Canadian citizens, it's unpleasant. There's bland news as opposed to the country's important news feed, and this is impoverishing the experience and undermining the democratic life of Canadians, not to mention causing a drop in traffic to news sites. According to a news recently published McGill study, our colleague from earlier was mentioning this or was a part of this study. So news has been replaced by memes on Facebook. We're talking about the disappearance of 5 to 8 million views per day on news content in Canada. On the issue of artificial intelligence, the Canadian government will have to act quickly to ban or regulate the distribution of AI-based content, such as deepfakes, audio faking as well. Bill C-63 responds in part to this by criminalizing content that is deemed harmful, but it doesn't go far enough. We need greater transparency in AI-generated content. Also have to address the issue of intellectual property. The Journal, there's a recent newspaper that was mentioning this issue. It has to be acted on quickly and not wait 30 years like was the case for C11. Canadian parliamentarians must also declare war on content farms that produce fake news on demand about this country or other countries. There are foreign governments that are behind this, like Russia and China. There are 140 million people that have been exposed to fake news in the U.S. election in 2020, and this is highly concerning in the context of the upcoming presidential elections in November 2024. On this subject, I think it's astonishing that Canada tolerates the dissemination of propaganda. Press releases from the Chinese Communist Party on CIZIAN's Canadian Newswire, and this has been going on for years. In conclusion, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. It's important that Canada be on a war footing when it comes to misinformation, whether it be, or disinformation, whether it be generated by AI or manually. We need a better framework for generative AI, and we need to protect the intellectual property of Canadian media and artists who could suffer as a result of these technological advances and tools in the coming years. Thank you, Mr. White, for your opening statement, and thank you for respecting your timeline. Thank you.
Committee, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Hill, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director of Media Smarts. Our office is located on the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and we are grateful for the invitation to appear today as part of this study. And I'm joined today by Media Smarts Director of Education, Matthew Johnson. So Media Smarts, if you haven't heard of us, is Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy. We're a not-for-profit charitable organization, and our vision is that all people in Canada are empowered to engage with all forms of media confidently and critically. To achieve this goal, we advance digital media literacy through world-class research, education, public engagement, and outreach. Through our programs, people in Canada learn to become active, engaged, and informed digital citizens. Digital media literacy is essential to an informed and engaged populace and electorate. Canada is especially in need of a coordinated approach that moves beyond only access and skills-based understanding of digital media literacy. The recent increase in visual disinformation, manipulated images, bots, artificial intelligence, or what we talk about as deep fakes, requires that we seriously engage in countering disinformation. A recent report from StatsCan confirms that people in Canada, around 43%, are feeling overwhelmed by these massive shifts in technology and information. So, for example, photographs and videos used to serve as proof that something occurred or happened in a particular way, and they are no longer reliable. Research shows that people of all ages and beliefs are vulnerable to mis and disinformation. People in all sectors, including parliamentarians like yourselves, need to know how to verify information and how to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable sources. We need to promote information verification as a social norm and habit in Canada. Knowing and practicing verification skills empowers citizens to mitigate the potential impact of the disinformation and other online harms they encounter. Digital media literacy education has been shown to be an effective approach to addressing misinformation. Around the world, there have been successful interventions with audiences, ranging from elementary students to seniors. And our own Break the Fake program and materials have found to be effective in both our own evaluations and those done by independent evaluators. The last 5 years have also shown that not all approaches are equal. Most importantly, it is essential to focus on discernment over just debunking. Many interventions aimed solely at teaching people to recognize misinformation have a side effect of reducing trust in reliable sources as well, essentially teaching people to be cynical instead of skeptical. As well, evaluations have identified 3 essential elements of a successful digital media literacy intervention. First, focusing on critical thinking and intellectual humility. Second, practical instruction in information triage. And finally, successful interventions recognize that in our networked world that we're all a part of, we are not just consumers of information, but we're also broadcasters of information ourselves. And digital media literacy is essential to combat this mis and disinformation. For parliamentarians as elected public figures, the stakes of authenticating and verifying information online are even higher, given that you have wide public reach and are considered trusted sources of information. When a trusted source or leader makes a misstep and spreads misinformation, the effects can reach a large and broad audience of Canadians and can erode people's trust in institutions, specifically the government. Parliamentarians and their staff need support to build their digital media literacy skills when it comes to verifying information online. So given all of this, I would like to conclude by providing 2 recommendations. First, we recommend that Parliament, both in the House and Senate, require mandatory training for all parliamentarians and their staff on how to verify information and combat mis- and disinformation. Second, as we have recommended consistently for over 15 to 20 years, we recommend that the Government of Canada develop a digital media literacy strategy that will include supporting all people in Canada with the skills to navigate the online information ecosystem confidently and critically. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Hill, and thank you for being on time as well. We're going to start with our first 6-minute round with Mr. Brock for 6. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your attendance. I'm going to start with you, Mr. White. I'm reading from an article titled AI-Powered Disinformation is Spreading. Is Canada ready for the political impact? Starts by talking about a story regarding Slovakia's national election last fall. Just days before the election, a mysterious voice recording began spreading a lie online. The manipulated file made it sound like Mikhail Semenka, leader of the Progressive Slovakia Party, was discussing buying votes with a local journalist, but the conversation never happened. The file was later debunked as a deep fake hoax. On election day, Semenka lost to the pro-Kremlin populist candidate Robert Fico in a tight race. While it's nearly impossible to determine whether the deep fake file contributed to the final results, the incident points to a growing fear about the effect products of artificial intelligence are having on democracy around the world, and in particular Canada. According to Caroline Xavier, head of the Communications Security Establishment, this is what we fear. There could be a foreign interference so grave that then the electoral results are brought into question. We know that misinformation and disinformation is already a threat to democratic processes. AI will potentially add to that amplification. That is quite concerning. What is Canada currently doing, in your opinion, to address this threat, or what should they be doing?
Well, Canada is already working hard with what they did with C18 and C11 for Canadian content, and with C63, it's going to fight misinformation and contenu préjudiciable as well. Are we doing enough? Probably no, but AI is an opportunity as well as a threat. And as far as deep fakes are concerned, I would strongly urge the government to legislate on that matter within the next 12 to 18 months, especially deep fake videos, deep fake audio as well, which you mentioned. So we have a lot to work on in the next 12 months on that issue, taking into context the upcoming federal election in Canada.
Correct. Mr. Chair, can you alert me when there's 2 minutes remaining, please? Turning now to Ms. Hill and Mr. Johnson, thank you for your attendance. I enjoyed our discussion in my office a few weeks ago. I listened to your opening statement very carefully, Ms. Hill. You talked about some suggestions for parliamentarians moving forward, mandatory training, and a digital media strategy for the government as a whole. Can you add a little more meat to that particular discussion, please?
Certainly, around the digital media literacy strategy?
Both? Yeah.
We know that most of us have not received education on how to verify information well. And certainly any of us who are beyond a certain age have not received any ever. But additionally, the information environment is so rapidly changing in the volume and velocity of information that we're receiving. And we don't, what used to be a reliable source and you only went to 1 or 2 sources doesn't exist anymore. There's a huge menu available to us. So we think that folks who work for government, parliamentarians and their staff, are as vulnerable as any of us are to being fooled, to being, to reading something and not knowing how to verify well and easily, both for their personal lives and their professional lives. And we know that there are really easy skills that folks can learn very quickly that will help them feel confident about the information they're consuming, knowing what's a reliable source and knowing how to identify it, and then sharing good information, because that's what we really need to see happen.
And your comments on the media strategy?
Well, other nations in the world, we heard referenced earlier this morning, have had strategies in place, some for more than 15 years, but certainly
2 minutes, Mr.
most countries in the world are adopting strategies that address this from a holistic perspective. So appreciating it's a complex problem. There's so many factors that impact so many different government departments, all levels of government. We need to bring everyone together to look at how we're going to address this problem, because it's only going to get worse.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hill. I cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Couric.
Thanks very much, Mr. Brock, and welcome, and appreciate the work you do. And I know, likewise, when we had a chance to have a discussion and developing a national strategy, I referenced that under the previous Harper Conservative government, there was a national financial literacy framework that I think would provide a great model for helping promote the sort of things that you're talking about. But I would simply ask for Canadians who might be watching, the resources that Media Smarts has, both for parents, for young people, for teenagers, for people that might have a little bit of snow on the roof, how would they access those resources through your organization?
Sure. So everything we do is free. Everything is available on our website. In English, it's mediasmarts.ca. Thank you for letting me do this. And in French, it's abiomedia.ca. Everything is always fluently bilingual and available to educators, trusted guardians, parents, and even some resources for youth themselves. So we encourage, if you have any question about media or the digital space, please access our website. It's all there for you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Couric. Ms. Damoff for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to three of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. White, I'm going to start with you. Ms. Hill mentioned trusted sources, and I would argue most Canadians would think that political parties are trusted sources. But, you know, there's conspiracy theories that are being actively promoted by the Conservative Party, that the pandemic was a plot by global financial elites trying to re-engineer our economy, that our climate policies are an attempt to limit movement and create 15-minute cities to limit personal freedom. 15-minute cities are a legitimate urban planning concept, but they've been twisted around. And even the World Economic Forum, that it's an elitist global conspiracy controlling governments around the world. Just a few minutes ago at the Finance Committee, Yvonne Baker said, "Who's the most dangerous dictator in the world?" And one after another, three Conservative members said, Justin Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, to which he responded, "It's actually Vladimir Putin." When we have legitimate parties promoting these kinds of discourse amongst the Canadian public, it's leading to mistrust in our democratic institutions. And I wonder if you could just speak to how dangerous it is when we do have trusted sources, or what should be trusted sources, spreading this kind of information.
Well, the mistrust overall is targeting institutions, including the media and politicians. And one of the other factors that we should also consider is the development and the increase of news avoidance from Canadians in the past few years, especially after 2 long years of pandemic. So I think news avoidance is truly a really big factor to consider. How can we fight news avoidance? And I do believe that media literacy programs, compulsory, like Quebec has announced starting September 2025, could be a solution, among others, to fight disinformation at the media level and also at the political level.
Thank you. And I wonder, Ms. Hill, if you could, you've been doing this work since the mid-1990s, Media Smarts has. So you've seen a lot of change over the years. I wonder if you can comment on how it's changed and how the landscape has changed, and what impacts you're seeing on not only politicians but on society in general.
I'll start and my colleague may join. So how it has changed? Everything has changed. Really. I think one of the pieces that's really helpful to think about is that each one of us, we used to receive information, and we were at the receiving end of media. It was fed to us, and we basically trusted it. As the internet grew, and our information grew. And so now sources, we're talking about information, not news. So it's important to make that distinction. But we're also talking about each and every one of us being at the center of a huge system and network. And those networks are vast and immeasurable, frankly. We don't know what something we put online can go to 10 people or 10 million people. And so how we all communicate is very, very different. Additionally, what's added a challenge is the volume and the velocity of the information that is overwhelming people, contributing to that news avoidance. And the biggest change is that we no longer have the luxury of the privilege of just receiving. We have to actively engage. We have to be educated. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to verify. We have to determine for ourselves what's reliable. And we need to build the resilience of our citizens so that they can also learn those skills and know how to do that for themselves, because that is the best way to combat this. I mean, we need regulation, absolutely. There's no question. We need all sectors of society participating in this. But from our perspective and where our expertise is in what works and what will help at the individual level on the ground. And we know that education will do that.
I would add, too, the most recent major change has been the use of recommendation algorithms and sorting algorithms that curate our information ecosystem. We have moved from an environment where most of the information that we consumed was curated by humans, where even if we didn't necessarily have access to the rooms where it happened, those processes were documented, they were understandable. And we're now at a situation where that is being done in a way that is not knowable to the consumer, and in many cases is not knowable even to the people who operate these platforms, because these are artificially intelligent machine learning algorithms, and frequently they make decisions based on data or proxy data that may be inaccurate, that may be discriminatory, that may in some cases lead people who have already begun consuming some conspiracy or disinformation, adjacent information will lead them down rabbit holes. But in an even broader sense, it makes us alienated from our information ecosystem because we don't know how these decisions are being made. We know from our own research and research that's been done elsewhere that this is not inevitable, that people can take more control over their information diet, and that people who have a self-curated media diet are more resilient to disinformation. So that's the latest major change, or the latest major addition to our digital media literacy approach. It's something that we're constantly iterating on in the basis of changes in the environment and new research.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Damos. Mr. Villemure pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Villemure, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam. I have a question for you. You were referring to critical thinking. Is that something that's just vanished from society?
I certainly wouldn't say that critical thinking has vanished from society. It's a difficult thing to measure. But what we do know is that, as Ms. Hill referenced, the heart of critical thinking is intellectual humility. It is being willing to recognize that we might be wrong. And it is being willing to set standards under which we would change our minds. So we do know that, in general, the English language and, so far as I know, French language media environment has become more polarized. That remains less true in Canada than in the United States, but it has become more polarized than it was in the past.
Merci. Je vais arrêter là.
Thank you. Mr. White, thank you for being here. You are really the person to invite, clearly. I missed the beginning of your presentation. Is it possible to get the copies of Yes, I provided that, and as well as all the sources of my information. Thank you. I have a few quick questions, rapid fire, and then some general questions. The University of Montreal center called CRIM has created an algorithm that can identify deep fakes before they inflict any damage. Is this credible? Yes, absolutely. There are tools also to test the virality of information, like crop time kill. which Meta was going to block access to for the new researchers and colleagues of mine. Yes, there is a way, indeed, to have some idea based on that type of technology and to identify what might go viral quickly. This is something that's been in existence for a few years. The media will use this choice to select a homepage, for instance, or select other information that they're going to be sending out quickly to the citizens, to people online. Do you think something like TikTok could condition, in a way, some segments of the population? Well, one of the dangers of TikTok is that it's essentially a search engine for people between 10 and 30, and we know that TikTok is not a search engine, and we know that there are some major concerns as to potential transmission of data from Canada towards the PRC authorities, and we also know that there's a 270-day a timeline before it's blocked in the U.S., and we know in 2025. So this is something perhaps we should also think about. In Canada, it's a source of significant information among the youth, and it's become a search engine that has replaced Google for many young people, so it can be a major concern. And also, TikTok is an entertainment network and not an information network. Thank you very much. Over time, given fake news and alternative facts, do you think lying has become socially acceptable? Clearly, amplification caused by social media and polarization in politics, loss of confidence in the media, all of this is taking part in this, but I wouldn't go that far. Earlier on, even if it can't be true, it can almost it can seem that way, right? Yeah, and that's specifically why I push for media literacy training in primary school, middle school, and high school, even among seniors, digital training in a way so that people are aware of the fact that if they put something on social media, then the next day can be on page 1 of the National Post, or many Canadians can access that information. People would think again twice or maybe 100 times before they would post anything. I never use really social media because it's not media. Facebook is not going to ever have journalists in Moose Jaw or in Rimouski, but we need our information media. I support the federal program for supporting, in its turn, the media, and it's important. The importance of our media. I wouldn't want them to disappear. Absolutely, certainly. For our part, we support local media, and that's important. You talked about noise avoidance in a way. The media that we're talking, the media that was cut off from what we've been cut off from in terms of Facebook, the idea that Facebook would no longer want the news broadcast on its site, is that a news avoidance? Absolutely. It's like a act of a bad corporate citizen. It's unacceptable that news would be blocked in Canada, the only G7 country where we can't have access to information when there are forest fires in the Northwest Territories. There could be elections in the U.S. in early November, federal elections likely next year, and that's a major issue for society, that blocking of news in the country. The use of deep fakes, is that potentially going to happen? Yes. There is often transparency of the tools. Often media have charters where they have to say they're using artificial intelligence or not. The media will be transparent. We should require the same thing from algorithms and social media. The good thing is, given the role of the media, there are agreements with the major press, like Canadian Press and others, Reuters, like the AP, the major four. In a few minutes or in a few hours, you can debunk the videos. But it's extremely concerning because, yes, this will happen in the next federal election. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Green for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to try to the best of my ability to get through this round and allow each of the guests to be able to answer because it is ultimately our responsibility to get back some good recommendations. And while some have been put forward in the opening remarks, I wanted the opportunity for our guests to be able to expand on it. So could you please provide examples of best practices in other jurisdictions of countering disinformation and misinformation and malinformation in the work of parliamentarians? We can go from Mr. White over. It doesn't matter the order of operations here.
I cannot speak. So I'll start, and Matthew, you can add.
Sure.
I can't speak specifically to in the work of parliamentarians per se. We haven't researched that. We have looked at in society writ large, so for all citizens. And we have made the assumption that parliamentarians are citizens as well. And so hence what is valuable to citizens will be valuable to parliamentarians and their staff as well.
Has there been any reflection or conversation around the use of these tools by political parties?
So has there been any reflection by us about the use of can you just clarify the question?
I'm wondering, like, so you're using, your information to inform the public, but I'm wondering if in your studies or areas of interest, you have given consideration to the way in which political parties could potentially use these tools and tactics to, further exacerbate some of the divisions and social upheaval that we're seeing.
We have not done that work. No, just to clarify.
Mr. White,
okay.
That's okay. I'll just go on to the next. Mr. White, on the topic of best practices.
I would recommend you to look at the leadership of the European Union, l'Union Européenne, the strength of 28, 29 countries, funding heavily media literacy programs and programs against disinformation. If you look at their website and all the conferences that they have held in the past few years, EU is the place to look for. And to inspire
are you
yourself.
Are you finding in your studies that their recommendations or policies that have been put in place, their laws, have yielded any kind of discernible result? Is there a way to track the effectiveness of it?
They are able in France, and they have been doing so for years, to impose major fines to Meta and Google for lack of respect of privacy or other issues, even the push for royalties for news media organization across EU. So yes, they have a leadership position in all these fields.
And there is evidence from other nations who have strategies to support that the strategies are working. It was mentioned earlier this morning. Finland is an excellent example. They've been doing this work for quite a long time. They have adopted an approach that is about educating all ages, from daycare to seniors' homes, and really focused on building the capacity of their citizens to recognize and identify when there is mis or disinformation present. And they have excellent evaluation and research that's showing they are much more resilient, as was mentioned earlier this morning, to any efforts to try and influence citizens with mis or disinformation. They're much more competent and capable and empowered. So we did a research study with funding from the Government of Canada, and we talked to 7 or 8 different countries about the initiatives that they've undertaken. We're happy to make that research and report available to you folks, but absolutely the EU is doing wonderful work. Finland, Latvia, Australia, the UK has made phenomenal progress in the past 4 to 5 years. So it's Canada was a leader in media literacy. We have a fabulous tradition. We would love to see that continue. We're a little bit behind, but we have every opportunity to catch up and surpass, because we have amazing people in our country who are phenomenal experts in this area.
I'll share with you in a little bit of humility. There, I think somebody had mentioned kind of your own intellectual honesty. There have been moments where I may have retweeted something that wasn't 100% factually correct, that had, caused concern or perhaps harm in communities. Recognizing that, of course, you want to delete it. You want to address it in a way that addresses the harm that is caused. And so I'm wondering, Ms. Hill, could you provide consideration in future work, perhaps, to help us as parliamentarians create resources to ensure that we're not spreading misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation? And to both witnesses, Mr. White as well, could you also perhaps reflect on ways in which we need to raise our accountability in public discourse to make sure the things that we're talking about are indeed factual, and perhaps provide some kind of ethical guidelines in the way in which, as elected officials with national platforms, that we are holding ourselves to a higher level of accountability and ethical standards when it comes to this? Because in populist moments, and I won't even say whether they're left or right populist moments, but in populist moments where the velocity of information spreads like wildfire, I would just hope that our committee could come forward in a nonpartisan way with some recommendations that help reflect that. Is that something you're willing to help with, Ms. Hill and Mr. White?
Very quick response.
Yes, we'd be thrilled to.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We're going to go to the next round, 2.5 minutes each, because there is a bit of committee business that I need to take care of, and we're done at 1:05 on the clock. Mr. Kirk, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, and I hope that our friends from Media Smarts can provide, and then I do have another question that I'd like to ask. But quite often, one of the challenges is the conversation around information, misinformation, disinformation becomes inherently political because it's to somebody's political advantage to simply accuse their opponents of lying. And something that I hear a lot about, being a rural member of Parliament, is the firearms debate. And so I'm not asking you to take a position on that, but that's certainly something that I've heard a ton of misinformation, including from political parties in this place. So not that issue, but how do we make sure that we provide media literacy, that we can combat misinformation, disinformation in a way that acknowledges that there is also a valid policy and political debate that can be had in the midst of some of those what can be tough conversations.
One of the fundamental aspects of digital media literacy is understanding the difference between fact and opinion. It's one of the things we teach starting in elementary school because it's fundamental to having any kind of reasoned debate, as you say. Beyond dividing those two, beyond dividing whether we're discussing an opinion and discussing facts, media literacy helps us to identify which sources of information are reliable. And so it is only when we can divide opinion and fact, and when we, on all sides of an issue, are drawing from reliable, verifiable sources of information that we can have that debate.
And if I could, because I'm pretty sure I'm close to being out of time, but would it be helpful if, for example, the next recommendations, if there was something on these sites, something that simply said, look, here is the algorithm, some algorithmic transparency that would be beneficial, that at least that information is then put forward, and maybe just a yes or no answer from both our witnesses. Is that something that might be helpful?
The short answer is it's complicated, but yes, there are ways of doing it.
Okay.
And it would be valuable, yes.
And
yes, and transparency and total transparency is the key to fight opacity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kirk. Mr. Baines, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for joining us today. I'll begin with Ms. Hill on Media Smarts. How far is it reaching? I have teenage kids, so very interested in this topic. I also I'm a university lecturer, and I actually spent a full 3-hour course on how to find sources, the correct sources, and how things like Wikipedia people think is real. It's like everything on there is believable. So and how far you need to actually look deeper into, say, any magazine, or online page, and how much actual research you yourself have to do to get to what a real a credible source is. So I wanted to see how far you're reaching across Canada and like what age levels and maybe if you're actually describing these things in that manner. And I mean, this is, of course, like a K to 12 system versus a university level where there's better comprehension.
So our reach is good, could be much better. So we're a small organization. We're actually only 12 staff. We're project funded, so we exist and survive by responding to calls for proposals for funding related to digital media literacy. That being said, our worst nightmare is that we create these phenomenal resources that sit on a website that no one sees. So we work very hard to build our audience. We know that our educational resources, for example, get over 1 million views a year. A lot of our projects or research, when we're promoting it, will get tens of millions of views, perhaps.
So just to, I know we have a little bit of time. So are you? I know that educators are the focus. You're sort of telling them about your program, and therefore, are they subscribing to it, or how are they receiving it, and how further is the program going?
Yes, we work with all of the departments of education in all the provinces and territories. We maintain an educational contact list that has over 1,500 educators at all levels of all ministries, and we promote our resources to them. We know we have thousands of teachers who are accessing our resources. Everything's available for free. Everything is tied distinctly for every province and territory to every curriculum. So you can be a grade 8 math teacher in Newfoundland and find a lesson related to media literacy, or a grade 3 English teacher in the Yukon.
And then what are the results?
Thank you, Mr. Baines. That's 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Hill. Monsieur Villemure, 2 minutes et demi.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur White.
So we're here in the Ethics Committee, and we have some recommendations to make on disinformation and misinformation. Now, in the little time I have, in the 2 minutes I have, my question to you would be, what are your recommendations in order to reduce the damage done by disinformation?
My apologies. I really enjoy Mr. Villemure's interventions, and unfortunately it's not being broadcast through the English channel of the translation.
Okay, we'll attempt to work on that. I've stopped the clock. J'ai arrêté le temps, Monsieur Villemure.
Is it possible to restart it, Mr. Chair? Because I completely missed everything that he said.
We can do that. Go. Is it working? Is it working now?
Can you hear me? So I'll be speaking in French to make sure that the translation is going through. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. White, we are the Committee on Ethics, Personal Life, and Privacy, and we have to bring forward some recommendations on the effects or consequences of disinformation and misinformation. So I would like to hear your recommendations. What should we put in our report? As I said this morning, it's very important to bring forward a bill to go against deep fakes, whether they are videos or recordings. We have also to legislate artificial intelligence, whether it be chatbots or others. We also have to have full transparency of algorithms from social media. And I think that one of the other 4 important objectives on the short and long term would be education focused on media literacy, on information and disinformation in primary schools, secondary schools, universities, and why not also for the elderly who haven't had the same education. I didn't have a phone in my hand until 2000 or 2004.
So that's what I'm talking about, supporting the media, financially, information media, so that our ecosystem is fine. What about European Union standards? Are they the gold standard, if you will? Or is that something, this legislation to be created? Clearly, the European Union is 30 countries, so it would have high impact. I think we could gain some inspiration from what they're doing. Look at what France has done. So they prohibit fake news during election campaigns. We wouldn't want to amplify anything in Canada, but we could certainly gain inspiration from that French legislation to counter disinformation, specifically during federal election campaigns or provincial or municipal. Madam Hill, in a few words, what would be your recommendations? If you could send them in writing, if you don't have time to finish this, how do we reduce the negative effects of misinformation to disinformation?
They would be almost identical to Mr. White's.
Okay.
So obviously we're terribly biased, but we believe 100%, and the evidence supports it, education. We need to have education for our citizens, for our children, for our youth, for our adults, for seniors. We know, and over the past 5 years, we've learned and evidence has supported that it really works. It really does make a difference. We just need to reach everyone and provide them with that opportunity.
Merci, Monsieur Villemure, Ms. Hill. Go ahead, Mr. Green, for 2.5.
Thank you. I should note that there were some additional translation issues on the back end of this broadcast, but I digress. I would like to, although education certainly is a big proactive step in the continuum of misinformation, disinformation, I wonder if the members could provide some insight, again, going back to accountability. From their perspectives, if there's anything missing, what should we be considering at this committee as recommendations to help provide better legislative, regulatory, in some instances perhaps criminal responses to the accountability of the willful spread? And I give reference to the way in which these are sometimes used to fill hate, used to incite political violence, social violence, targeting minority groups. I referenced the trans community, indigenous community, black community, Jewish community, Muslim community, you name it. I'm wondering if you could just reflect on how we can better hold people accountable, or platforms or corporations more broadly.
Outside of education, we don't have recommendations on policy because that's outside of our mandate. But what I can say from our research is that many people who have been victims of some of the things you've been describing have said that when they have gone to law enforcement for support, the people that they've encountered have not been sufficiently well informed about these phenomena. So just as it is important to have policymakers and parliamentarians trained in these issues, it really is important to support law enforcement and make sure that they have been educated in these issues so that when someone comes to them with one of these issues, or for instance, having been the victim of a pornographic deepfake, which we know are in fact the vast majority of uses of that technology, they're familiar with the laws, they're familiar with the regulations, they understand enough about the digital media world that they are able to be of help.
That's good. Thank you very much, Mr. White.
Yes, first of all, we need to protect ASAP the intellectual property of media and artists across Canada because of the effect of AI right now, which will have a huge effect on intellectual property in Canada. Prohibit the use of deepfakes ASAP, and as far as social networks are concerned, we need to legislate to impose and compel total transparency of algorithms to better understand what's going on in terms of flow of information and disinformation.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes the panel. I want to thank all our witnesses, Ms. Hill, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. White, for being here today and participating in this important study. And on behalf of Canadians, thank you for the work. And on behalf of the committee, thank you for coming. Okay, so I'm going to dismiss you. We're going to deal with a little bit of committee business here. As you know, we received a letter from the RCMP Commissioner based on Mr. Green's request. The letter came in on April 26th. That's in relation to SNC Lavalin. I just wanted to inform the committee that we're still waiting for the translated documents from Mr. Wernick. So what I need the committee to consider is where we go based on not just what we received from the RCMP Commissioner, but also from Mr. Wernick as well. And that should be, I expect that should be coming soon. from translation. So I know that the study called for one meeting, but if there's any consideration that any additional work needs to be done on this, I want the committee to consider that as we move forward. Okay, so Mr. Barrett, go ahead.
It's on a separate matter, Chair. So
Okay.
if you're done with that.
Okay, so I am done with that,
Okay.
but I just want the committee to be aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Go
So-
ahead. Okay, go ahead on that.
I'm a little confused. Are you asking for us to approve something now before we even
No,
have the information?
just
Okay.
based on this information
Yeah.
received from the RCMP Commissioner.
Yeah.
We'll be getting that the other information from Mr. Warnick. We've not finalized the study. So based on this and based on what we get from Mr. Warnick, I'm going to need direction from
Okay.
committee as to where you want to go on the SNC
Okay,
level.
and do we know when we're getting the
It should be
translated?
coming soon. The expectation was the 29th, which was yesterday,
Yeah.
but it should be coming soon.
Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Monsieur Villemure?
C'est une question d'organisation.
For organization purposes, for our committee business, how much time are we expecting? Because we have to be elsewhere as well. Are we be done at 1 or are we going beyond?
Mr. Barrett has something he'd like to say. So 1:05 is what time we'd be done at. Okay? Go ahead, Mr. Housefather.
Mr. Chair, I also wanted to just mention, I found some things in the RCMP letter a bit strange, particularly blaming the war in the Ukraine for the delay in terms of transmission of the information. Would there be a consideration of asking them further questions about that?
Good.
Okay,
We
because
could do that.
having read the response,
Well, this is why I brought it up
Okay.
today, because there are some things that perhaps were of concern to committee members. And if there are concerns, then I would ask that you address them to the clerk and, again, consider as we move forward on the SNC-Lavalin issue, because we're not completed that study, pending this information and the other information from Mr. Warnick being received. So we may, in fact, want to call Mr. Duhaime back, or we may want to provide some clarification. We're certainly getting into the letter writing business on this committee lately. So go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Chair,
No.
with the last 5 minutes, I have
Sorry,
a motion I'd
I
like to
didn't see it,
move.
Darren. Sorry.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and in light of recent media reports, the committee undertake a study into Minister Randy Boissonnault's alleged contravention of ethics and lobbying laws forthwith, that the committee invite Minister Randy Boissonnault and Kirsten Poon to testify individually in addition to any other relevant witnesses, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Chair, this has been circulated to all members of the committee in both official language, so I'll speak to it briefly, knowing that we have limited time. You know, we have a mandate at this committee to review matters of this nature, and this is just the latest in a series of unethical dealings by the Trudeau government. It's bombshell news that broke in global news. And this is a Trudeau government minister involved in lobbying the government, and there is potential illegality with respect to the Lobbying Act, and of course questions of the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members. Minister Boissonnault lost his seat in the 2019 election, then an MP, and he restarted his company Xenex to lobby the Trudeau government for whom he was previously an MP. The minister tried to shield this from the public by hiding behind his business partner and lobbyist. Their only client was the Edmonton International Airport. They received $25 million in pandemic recovery funds in 2021, 1 month before he was named the Liberal candidate and just 2 months before the federal election. The meetings took place in 2021 and 2022 that helped bring in $110 million in federal grants to the Edmonton International Airport. So it was revealed that the minister and his lobbyist business partner still have ties, and in fact, Minister Randy Boissonnault withheld the name of the business that he was receiving payments from, and he failed to disclose the name of Navis Group, which was rebranded from his company. A bit of sleight of hand here, Chair. The trading name versus the corporate name. So someone would have to do a corporate records search to determine that this deception was happening. So this company that he's receiving payments from is simultaneously lobbying the government, including the finance department, for whom he was the associate finance minister. So they got direct access to the finance minister, the deputy prime minister, for a meeting on hydrogen fuel development. And within months of the meeting, Chair, the minister made an announcement at the Edmonton International Airport awarding local hydrogen fuel initiatives with $9.74 million in federal funds. So it's troubling. It's unacceptable. Obviously, this wouldn't be the kind of practice that Canadians would accept in private business, but it is a pattern with this Trudeau Liberal government. They're once again caught doing business unethically with taxpayer funds. It's undermining public trust. That's why we need to have hearings on this, Chair, and look forward to the motion passing swiftly.
So just so that I'm clear, you're moving the motion, correct? Yes. Okay, we're in committee business. The motion has been properly moved. Mr. Fisher, I'm sorry I missed your hand before. I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak, but we are dealing with a motion right now. Is it regarding this? I have to adjourn the meeting at 1:05. We don't have any other resources. So either way, whether we start this now, it's going to end at 1:05. So on that, do you have anything you want to say, Mr. Fisher?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. You've got a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to have to cut you off. So
yeah. I mean, the Peace and the Global repeatedly acknowledged that Minister Boissonnault has always followed all of the ethics rules that apply to him as an elected official. It even includes confirmation of this from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Global even quoted, I believe, experts that was the case. From what I can see in the article, Minister Boissonnault has done nothing wrong. I think that your motion, Mr. Baird, is clearly reaching. Certainly, if it's something that the commissioners see an interest in studying and taking a look at, certainly we didn't move forward with a motion to do a study on Jenny Byrne as she was related to Pierre Poilievre in the office of the Conservative opposition leader, because it's being studied, it's being looked at by the commissioner. We'll wait to see if where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't see this at this moment as something that this committee needs to, we've certainly got names that we can add to that study if the committee is so eager, if the Conservatives are so eager to bring forward a conversation on this. We've got names that we can add to that we can certainly make that study a little bit more fulsome. Certainly some names from FORCHEC. But I would suggest that if the commissioners feel that there's something here, then they will take a peek at that. And Mr. Baird, I'm sure you remember the commissioners saying that members can reach out to them about some of their concerns. But I don't see that as something that should be started here at this committee and impede the things that we've worked on and to build a calendar of the things that we want to study.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Unfortunately, Ms. Damoff, I have you on the list, so when this resumes, if it resumes, then you will be first on the list, okay? Unfortunately, we've ran out of resources. I'm going to have to adjourn the meeting. I want to thank the clerk who's stepping in for Nancy today, and our analysts and our technicians as well. This meeting is adjourned.